Hey everybody, it's Professor DeArmas. I hope everything is going well with y'all with this weird semester change. I hope that y'all are able to finish the semester with me. I promise you things are going to be a little bit easier. Let's get down to where we left off in Hamlet. So at the end of Act 2, okay, Hamlet comes up with a plan after being super suicidal to write lines into a play because all of a sudden these actors just show up, right? And he's gonna write lines into a play that are he's gonna use as like some kind of like test, which kind of doesn't make any sense. But yeah, again, is he crazy or not? It's the question. And he's gonna test Claudius by watching the play. He says this thing at the end of Act 2. He says the play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. He even says to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who are kind of clueless this whole time. He's like, I'm only mad, but north-northwest. When the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw, which is weird. Like, why would you confuse a handsaw that you would cut wood with like a hawk, right? Like, that's weird. But like this kind of is something you might want to look at if you're writing the play, the analysis of whether Hamlet's mad or not and what that means to like his guilt, perhaps. But he says this to Horatio. He says, I have heard that guilty creatures sitting at a play have by the very cunning of the scene been struck to the soul, that presently they proclaim their malefactions, that they'll watch something and they'll be like, oh my God, I'm guilty. Though it have no tongue, it will speak through the most miraculous organ, their guilt, right? So he says, I have these players play something like the murder of my father before mine uncle. Observe his looks. I'll tend him to the quick, which means I'll watch him. If he blenches, which means if he like even blushes, I'll know my course. So he's saying, okay, I don't know if the ghost was trying to like tempt me or not, but I know for a fact that if I can see him watch this thing and he has a reaction, which again, like, is that proof? And like one of the things I want you to think about in this play is like, is this misinformation? Like, what is Hamlet doing? Like, why is he wasting time? Is it because he doesn't want to kill Claudius? Does he just not want to kill anybody? Or is this really like he needs forensic evidence, like he's a detective, okay? So that's the end of Act 2, Scene 2. So we start in with Act 3, okay? Rosencrantz and Guildenstern go to the king and they go, oh, we think he might be mad, but we're not sure. Because they're clueless, they're not that smart. And of course, like some of us are trying to figure that out. So it's a complicated question. I don't even think anybody really ever knows, okay? But I'm interested in what your opinion is. Of course, they're kind of dumb, though, so they're definitely not going to know. Polonius tells Hamlet to come, that Hamlet's going to come, excuse me. So he tells Claudius, hey, let's watch him talk to Ophelia, because I think he's mad because of love, right? And we know that whole Polonius thing. He thinks he's important, and he thinks he's the reason, okay? So we get the to be or not to be speech, and this is important because Hamlet's talking about suicide the whole time. He's deciding whether or not to do so. And there's a famous quote in the speech where he says, thus conscience does make cowards of us all. He says, thinking of something is what makes you a coward. And that's absolutely true when it comes to Hamlet, right? Because he's all indecision. He can't decide. He can't act. And he's like, oh, should I kill? Oh, should I not kill? Which is a heavy, heavy choice, right? So we got to think here, like, well, if he can use this play as kind of like the decider, then it doesn't make him feel so bad, right? Hamlet's kind of offloading that labor. He's like, I don't want to make the decision, so let's let the play make the decision. And he'll continue to do those things. I want to read a little bit of that play, of that soliloquy. And the soliloquy is important because and this is the most important soliloquy in the play as far as famous. He says, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, which means, is it nobler to kind of like suffer in life? Or take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing end them, or kill yourself? Like, should you suffer? Like, is that the right thing? Or like, who wants to suffer? Like, why sit in a room where you're cold? Just leave, right? He says to die, to sleep no more, which means like, that's it, it's over. And then he says, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and then thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. He's like, if sleep, if death is sleep, right, and waking up is living, well then, if he kills himself and it just stops life, then he's like, cool, I'll do that. But he says to die, to sleep perchance to dream. So if living is being awake and dying is death, but after you, right, dying is sleep, excuse me, but after you fall asleep, sometimes you have dreams. And he's like, well, maybe that's the afterlife. And he said, there's the rub, which means that's the problem. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come? Where do we go after death? If there's an afterlife, I don't want to kill myself because I might go to the wrong place, right? And then he says, that's the reason why people suffer in this world, because we don't know what ends up happening. And he goes, but what if what ends up happening isn't as bad as this place? And he's like really suffering. I think Hamlet wants to kill himself, but he's afraid to, right? He's afraid to do anything really. And then Ophelia walks in, right? And Ophelia, and it's not because Hamlet's a coward. It's just because Hamlet fully feels the gravity of all these decisions. It's kind of crazy. The situation he's put in. Do I kill a king? Do I kill my uncle, right? So Ophelia walks up and she's spying on Hamlet, right? And he kind of knows. The question of whether or not they're planning this is really interesting to how you read this scene. But I think Hamlet is bombarded by Ophelia here. He doesn't expect this. She was part of the plan, maybe. But now he's really angry with her. And I don't understand his behavior here. And I'd be interested in how you feel about it. But he says, I do well. And she says, I have all these things I want to give back to you. And Hamlet says, I never gave you those things, which is an outright lie, right? Which might make you think he's mad because he doesn't remember giving something to his girlfriend. And she says, my honored lord, I know you did. And with them words of sweet breath composed has made the things more rich. She's like, you gave these to me and you said beautiful things that made them mean more. Their perfume is lost. Take these again for to the noble mind. Rich gifts wax poor when givers prove unkind. You've been mean to me. And I don't want these things anymore, right? And think about that. Like, somebody gives you, like, a nice gift, and then they break your heart. You don't want that gift anymore. And I think Shakespeare knew that back then, and that's one of the things about this play that's really beautiful, is, like, it's still true, even 500 years ago, right? And then Hamlet asks her a really loaded question with load play. He asks her if she's honest, which means, are you being honest with me right now? Or is, like, are you working for your father, right? Which means you're working for the king, my enemy, or honesty might be something about her virginity. And she says, my lord, and he says, are you fair? And that's another double. He says, are you fair, which means are you pretty, or are you being even with me? Like, are you like being biased on one side? She goes, what do you mean? And he goes, if honesty and fair, then that if you're being honest and fair, then you shouldn't have a problem being beautiful. And then he like kind of says a bunch of stuff, and then he says, I loved you once. And she said, you made me believe it. And he says, you shouldn't have believed me. I loved you not. So he's like gaslighting her now. He's saying, listen, all those things I said to you, I didn't believe. And I never gave you these things. And like, is he crazy and he can't remember these things? Is he switching his position? Is this an act? I don't know. But what I do know is that Hamlet is putting Ophelia through a lot right now. And if he really loved her, it would take a crazy person, right? I know that's not the right word to use. But it would take someone who's mentally unstable to really like abuse someone who they love. So that might be proof of madness. But she says she was deceived, and he tells her, go to a nunnery, which is an interesting thing to say. Now, he could be telling her to go to a nunnery because she had sex with him and she has no virtue, she's not honest anymore, and the only place for a woman who's lost her dignity and honesty back then in Shakespeare's time was to be in a convent where your sexuality was no longer a part of you. You were giving your body to God. You were a nun. You would never marry. But if stuff's about to go down in Denmark, maybe he's trying to get her to a protected place. Maybe he's trying to throw rocks at Ophelia to get her to run away so she'll be safe, so that when all the things happen, she's not there. But Ophelia doesn't go. And he tells her over and over, get thee to a nunnery. And then he like curses her. And back then, a curse was a real thing, whether you did it in jest or not. He curses her. He says, I hope that you get the plague. And right now, you know, that's not a cool thing to say if you told someone you hope they get the corona. I hope that you can't have children. And I hope that disaster happens to you. Go to a nunnery. So like, he's trying to fear her into doing this thing. Is it because he hates her? Is it because this is part of his plan? Or is it because he knows he's about to start killing? And he doesn't want her to witness it. And Ophelia's like, oh my gosh. And then Hamlet says this really, really mean thing to her. He says, I've heard of your paintings. God gives you one face and you paint yourself another. Talking about makeup. He's like, all women are liars. And this is like a question about whether Hamlet's a feminist or not, because he's kind of mean to women and he says really awful things. And then he tells her one last time, go to a nunnery. So then after this, Ophelia goes back to her father, right? And says, You know, I think he's mad. And Shakespeare kind of makes everybody take different opinions on this. So the audience will consider them all. So Claudius disagrees with Polonius and says it's not love, it's madness, and we're going to send him to England. He's a danger to everyone right now. And his excuse is that England owes them money. But Polonius says, okay, before you send him to England, let's let him talk to his mother, okay? So, and then there's this famous thing Claudius says, which is really interesting. He says, madness and great ones must not unwatched go, which means like we shouldn't let people who are mad be by themselves, okay? So then we move into Act 3, Scene 2. And Hamlet's speaking as Shakespeare as he talks to the players about how to act well. And it's really cool because you never really hear Shakespeare behind the scenes talking to his actors with all these famous plays, right? He was really successful, the most famous playwright of all. So if you really want to, if you're like in drama or something, or you're just interested into it, go back to Act 3, Scene 2, and you can see some really interesting things where Shakespeare kind of like speaks through Hamlet. Hamlet has never really put on a play before. How does he know all these things? Shakespeare's just kind of like throwing his knowledge into it. It's kind of cool. So after this, he and Horatio make a plan to spy on the king as the king watches a play about, you know, a brother who murders his king brother in a, you know, like the exact thing that happens, right? So, but I want you to look at, when you read that, go back and look. Hamlet's mood is really up. Like, he's manic almost, right? Like, he's like, whoa, like, he's super excited, and I want to know, is it because he's about to find out if he should kill Claudius or not? But the ghost already commanded him to do so, and he swore that he would. So what does he need to figure out? If he's riding with the ghost, well then, ride with the ghost, man. Like, be wrong with the ghost or be right with the ghost. But Hamlet wants to be right for his own sake, or is he avoiding all of this, right? Or is it because he's not forced to kill in this moment, and he's excited because he gets to watch and do nothing? Or is it because he gets to manipulate people? And one of the things Hamlet's going to do in this scene is manipulate. And there's the whole kingdom there watching this play, and he's going to act crazy and scare people, because if you put propaganda out that shows a king being killed by his brother, you might start civil unrest. So this is where the terrorism stuff, for me at least, starts happening. It starts with a little bit of Ophelia, but it definitely starts running down to this area, because if the kingdom believes the king is a murderer and he murdered the last king and committed regicide, then he belongs in prison. And who else was involved? And they're at war with another country almost. So, I mean, Hamlet doing this right now is weakening Denmark for sure. Okay? So he messes with Ophelia too while the play is going on. He teases her. He sits next to her. He asks her if he can lay between her legs, which, you know, like he wants to put his head down on her lap. But that's that word play again. And he's like, oh, what a thing to lay between a maiden's legs. And he's embarrassing her in front of all of these people. He also just told her, I never loved you, go to a nunnery, and now he's going to be all like, I want to lay next to you. I mean, he's back and forth, back and forth. I mean, if you wanted to torture someone after you broke up with them, this is how you do it. And like, what kind of a person does that? So does Ophelia believe Hamlet's mad? Yes. Is he? I don't know if this is part of his strategy. He said he was going to wipe his memory of everything. So he certainly kept to that word. Or does it take someone who's kind of off balance mentally to kind of change their opinion and approach? I don't know. But the play happens, and some people have a hard time with the play because there's this like, in the audiences back then weren't given a lot of faith. So what they would do is, if I had a play about a guy crossing a bridge, before the play started, we would have people come out and just mime the plot. You'd see someone walking over a bridge, and then the play would start. So that's what happens. And in the miming of the plot, we see someone pour poison, and the whole play goes crazy. And then Hamlet looks up at his mother, and he says, Madam, how like you this play? And Gertrude says this line, Methinks the lady doth protest too much. She is denying any involvement too much. It makes me think she's guilty. And maybe Gertrude's speaking about herself. Remember, sometimes when we look at art, it reflects us, and it's really dangerous to interpret art because we're really interpreting ourselves. And when Hamlet asks her what she thinks of the play, the thing she says is, I think the queen's probably guilty. What does that mean about her? Anyways, Hamlet denies that the play, Claudius sees what's happening and he goes, is there any offense in this? He's like, are you saying something here, Hamlet? And Hamlet goes, no, 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 it's just jest. It's just for fun. Poison and jest, because he's being poisoned. And then Claudius asks him what the name of the play is, and he goes, the mousetrap. So he calls the king a mouse, which is a low animal, it's a rodent. And so another thing where it's like, we're going to trap a mouse, a little rat, right? So King Claudius, after this all happens, he gets really upset. And he rises and he says, lights, lights, turn on the lights. So like they light all the candles, right? Hamlet's so excited because he has his proof. But what proof is this? All that happened was Claudius was upset because a king died and he took over. And then he shows a play about a guy. I would be upset too if I didn't do it because it's an accusation. Hamlet tells Horatio, I'll take the ghost's word for 1,000 pounds. They agree that the ghost told the truth and that Claudius is guilty. So let's kill him, right? Like, that's it. The play should end. But it doesn't. And this is where Hamlet's decisions really matter. And this is where you got to think. If he's mentally unbalanced, then maybe these aren't decisions. But if these are rational decisions, then his delaying the thing he wants to do causes all this collateral damage, and he's comfortable with that. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, after the play's over, try to get Hamlet to talk. And he tells them, you can't play on me like a pipe. You can't. Stop trying to get information out of me. I'm not an instrument. He also says to them that his wit's diseased and he couldn't give them an answer. So again, this play back and forth between is he crazy, is he not? So, but before he can go kill Claudius, Polonius, of course, comes over and goes, hey, you got to go see your mom. So he's ready to kill Claudius, but he doesn't. And he goes, I'll go see my mom, and then I'll come back and kill Claudius. Act 3, Scene 3. The king decides that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are going to escort Hamlet to England. That he needs someone with him to go there because they need to watch, right? Madness in great ones must not unwatched go. So Polonius says, don't worry, I'll spy in the closet with Gertrude. I'll be behind a curtain, okay? And Claudius starts to pray. And part of his prayer, this is the only soliloquy we're going to get where that's like the character's head is opened up and there's like we get to listen to their thoughts, right? So Claudius gives us the answer, which is he did it, right? He says, oh, my offense is rank, which means it's like smelly. It smells to heaven. It hath the primeth eldest curse upon it, a brother's murder. In the Bible, right, with the Christian Bible, there's this story of Cain and Abel, that one of them kills the other one. These two brothers kill each other, right? But that's what Claudius did. He says, I can't pray. He says, forgive me my foul murder. He's like, how could I tell someone, please forgive my murder? That can't be, since I'm still possessed of my ambition, my queen. He's like, all the things that I got. I can't apologize while I'm enjoying. I can't say, I'm sorry I stole your car and still drive it around, right? So he says, I can't retain these things. And Hamlet walks by and sees Claudius praying, and he goes, I could just kill him right now. He's on his way to go see Gertrude, right? He's walking down the hallway. And he goes, now I'll do it. And then he goes, but he's praying and he's going to go to heaven. That wasn't part of the deal. The ghost told Hamlet, just kill him. Not wait till he's not praying. But Hamlet puts this little thing there. He says, no, 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 no. It's not perfect revenge. My father didn't get this opportunity. He says, a villain kills my father, and for that, I, his sole son, do this same villain send to heaven? I'm not going to do that. When he's drunk, when he's asleep in rage, when he's like having sex with his sister, right? Those are all sinful acts. Then I'll kill him, and his heels will kick at heaven as he falls to, So he's like, I got to send him to hell. And that's just, I don't know how you read that. I read that as him just like looking for a reason not to do it. But then when he leaves to go back to his mother's room, Claudius says, my words fly up, my thoughts remain below. Words without thoughts never to heaven go. He says, so if Hamlet had killed him here, it would have been all over. It would have been done. The ghost would have been like, thank you. Hamlet would have only killed one person. But the next scene, here we go. Here comes the collateral damage. So I want to read a little bit of the closet scene because it's really wonderfully written. It's one of my favorite parts. So he's talking to his mother and he says, Now, mother, what's the matter? And she says, Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended, which means Claudius. And he says, mother, you've my father much offended, meaning you married your brother. So it's like, who's his father, right? That's the first little fun part. And then the queen's like, come, come, you answer with an idle tongue. And he goes, go, go. You question with a wicked tongue. What is he saying? Okay, so I'm just not answering your question? Well, you are a sinner. And she says, how? And he says, what's the matter? And she says, have you forgot me? He's like, do you know who? She's like, do you know who you're talking to? I'm your mother. And he said, no, you're the queen. You're your husband's brother's wife. And I wish not, but you're my mother. So he just insults her like he's talking to Claudius. And she said, fine, then I'll find someone for you to speak to then. And he says, no, 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 sit down. I'm going to set up a mirror where you can see the inmost part of you. I'm going to give you a real talking to. And she says, what will thou do? Will you murder me? And she says, help. And remember, Polonius is hiding behind there, and he's behind a curtain, and Hamlet doesn't know who's behind the curtain. And he goes, and Polonius screams, what ho, help! And Hamlet thinks it's Claudius. And he goes, oh, a rat. Remember, he had called him the mousetrap. And he says, oh, there's a rat behind her. And he stabs his sword through the curtain and kills Polonius. He kills his girlfriend's father, who he's been messing with all this time. It's awful. And his queen goes, what have you done? And he goes, I don't know. Maybe I killed the king. And she's like, kill a king? And he says, yes, that was my word. And then Polonius falls out from underneath the curtain. And Hamlet isn't really upset about it, which is weird. Because you would think someone who's so cautious about murder might feel like, oh my gosh, I killed the wrong person. This is what I was hoping not to do. But all he says is, thou wretched, rash, intruding fool, farewell. I took thee for the better. Take your fortune. And then he looks at his mother. That's it. Whatever. Take your destiny. I thought you were the king. There's no like, what have I done? Which you would think, what have I done to Ophelia? He doesn't, which is weird. You'd think Hamlet would feel this more. So to the queen, he says, because Gertrude is wringing her hands. She's like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, what have you done? And he says, leave the wringing of your hands and let me wring your heart. And he starts like telling her, he's like, how could you do this? He shows her a picture of his dead dad and a picture of Claudius. And he's like, how could you go from this guy to this guy, right? And that's kind of like this big thing that he keeps doing. And he keeps talking and talking about how they're having sex and incest. He's really obsessed with that. And the queen breaks down and she says, oh, Hamlet, speak no more. Thou turnst my eyes into my very soul, and there I see such black and grained spots as will not leave their tint. I see such dark spots in my heart. For the first time now I realize what's happened. What does she mean there? That she's now feeling guilty for something? She doesn't let on, but Hamlet says, we'll throw away the bad parts of your heart, stop having sex with your brother, and try to save your soul. And she says, these words like daggers enter into my ears. What a beautiful metaphor, right? Speak no more. And he says, he keeps saying this, a murderer and a villain, that's who you're with. A vice of kings, a cutpurse of the empire. And then all of a sudden the ghost shows up. And Hamlet stops. Now imagine, it's just dead Polonius, Hamlet, and Gertrude in a room. And he's talking to Gertrude with a dead body on the floor. That's already upsetting. And then he stops in the middle of like insulting her, the worst insults he can think of. And he looks at nothing. The ghost only appears to Hamlet. And he says, save me and hover over me with your wings, you heavenly guards. And the queen goes, alas, he's mad. She goes, he's crazy. I don't see anything. And he says, have you, still speaking to the ghost, have you come your tardy son to chide? Because I haven't killed Claudius yet? Is that why you're here? And the ghost says, don't forget, this visitation is to whet thy almost blunted purpose. Look at your mother. Step between her and her fighting soul. Stop abusing your mother. That's not what I asked you to do. I asked you to kill Claudius. Go do that. Hamlet asks his mother, how are you? And she says, how come you're talking to the air? I don't know. You make my hair stand on the back of my neck. What's going on? And he says, I look at him. Don't you see him? And she says, to whom do you speak? And he says, do you see nothing? Hamlet says, do you see nothing? And the queen says this great line, nothing at all, yet all that is I see. She goes, I don't see anything there, but now I'm seeing things clearly, like you are crazy. And he says, look, your father, and then the ghost leaves. And she says, you're crazy, Hamlet. And he says, listen, I may be crazy, but I know what you're doing is wrong. And he says, please, stop having sex. That's what he asks her to do. Stop having sex with Claudius. Because yeah, maybe he's worried about her soul, and that's supposed to be incest, I guess. But it seems he has just like some kind of personal vendetta against that. She says that you've broken his heart in two, and he says again, well, throw away the bad part of it. Stop having sex with my dad. And then he looks at Polonius and he says, I do repent. I'm sorry. But he doesn't say I'm sorry to anybody. He goes, I have to be cruel to her only to be kind. And that's kind of what Hamlet's kind of philosophy is. If I'm really mean, it'll save bad things from happening later. But the queen asks him, what should I do? And again, he says, stop having sex. And then he says, you know, I have to go to England now. And the queen said, oh my gosh, I forgot. And he says, okay, so I need to lug these guts out of this room. And he drags Polonius out of the room by his feet. And that's the end of Act 3, Scene 4. And then we start in with Act 4. And Act 4 is an interesting scene, act. Because it continues moving forward with Hamlet, right? So, Act 4, Scene 1, the queen tells Claudius, Hamlet's mad, send him to England. And he killed Polonius, and Claudius is like, well, where's Polonius's body? And Gertrude tells him that Hamlet is drawing it apart, cutting it apart. What kind of person does that? Claudius tells Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to go get Polonius's body. Act 4, Scene 2. Let me open it up. This is the last one I'll do in this video, and then we will be finished. So in Act 4, Scene 2, the king says, okay, you see Hamlet, and Hamlet goes, safely stowed, which means I've hid the body. And then Rosencrantz goes, what have you done with the dead body? And Hamlet says, it's become dust. And Rosencrantz says, well, where is it? So we can take it to the chapel. And Hamlet says, don't believe it. And Rosencrantz says, believe what? And he says, that I can keep counsel with you, that I can talk with you and not my own. Don't believe I'm crazy. So again, this back and forth. And he says, besides, to be demanded of a sponge, he's like, you can't tell me orders. You're just a sponge. You soak up my orders. And Rosencrantz is like, you think I'm a sponge? Which means, like, are you that crazy that you think I'm actually like one of those things on a coral reef in the ocean? And he goes, well, if you soak up the king's orders, then you're a sponge. And he says, he doesn't ask you questions. He just squeezes you, and all that stuff comes out. And you'll be dry again. And Rosencrantz goes, I don't understand what you mean. And he goes, of course you don't. A knavish speech sleeps in a foolish ear. And he's like, my speech doesn't register in your dumb brain. And Rosencrantz says, just tell us where the body is. And Hamlet says, the body's with the king, but the king's not with the body. Talking about how the people of Denmark don't believe in Claudius, right? Guildenstern says, okay, fine. And then Hamlet says, fine, bring me to him. So he says, take me to the king. And that's where we'll stop. Act 4, Scene 3 will pick up next video. But just a couple things I want to talk about. There's some really interesting stuff going on in these two acts that you should be looking at. Number one, the ghost is super important because where would that scene have gone with his mother? And if you've watched the Mel Gibson production, it goes into a sexual place. And that's the topic of their conversation. He's like, I'm mad at you. You did this thing. You stopped with my dad and you went with this other guy. And then let's talk about what you're doing with him. And I can't believe it. And she starts crying and he's breaking her down. And then he's like really bearing down on her guilt and holding her down. And Mel Gibson takes that to a really incestuous, Oedipal place. Some other things to think about is Ophelia. I care so much about Ophelia. How Hamlet treats Ophelia tells me so much about his mental state. Because why would you make someone go through that if you didn't have to? Because I think there's other ways that he could have convinced people. Like, look what he's doing with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Not to mention, when he kills Polonius, look at what he's done to Ophelia, but he doesn't even feel bad about it. He doesn't. He doesn't say, I gotta go tell Ophelia, oh my gosh, what have I done? She's gonna be heartbroken. I may hate her dad. Look at how he treats Gertrude too, right? So who is he nice to? Horatio. But put yourself in Hamlet's position too, right? Everyone's a spy, even your girlfriend. What kind of paranoia does that have? Is he right to be paranoid? Who's with me? Who's against me? If you can answer these questions, the point of it isn't to just have fun with the play. I mean, like, that's kind of what I do. But if you can answer these questions, then you can say, listen, Hamlet's not in the right state of mind, so killing Polonius by accident, being so mean to Ophelia, he's a good person. He's just kind of like off balance right now. But if you're saying he's choosing to do these things, maybe he's not a good person. Maybe Hamlet's a monster. Maybe Hamlet's worse than Claudius. Because even though Claudius just killed one person, he wants Denmark to go forward. He wants Denmark to beat Norway. What does Hamlet want? To bring Denmark down from the inside? You know, you've heard that old saying, I'm going to take my ball and go home. If you won't let me play, then it's my ball and I'm going home. No one's going to play. I wonder if instead of the ball, it's the crown. I don't want you to be king. You won't let me be king. No one's ever going to be king again. Hey, y'all, that's domestic terrorism. If monarchy is government, let alone it's his uncle, cool. All monarchs are related to each other, right? That's the whole idea of monarchy. You can't kill a king. That's regicide. That's the highest crime in the kingdom. Okay, so some other things to think about. Hamlet, the soliloquies are the only place we can really listen to him. And Claudius gives us a really definitive answer. He definitely killed King Hamlet, which means if you think the ghost is lying or the ghost is a hallucination, how do you reconcile that the ghost is right? I'm not saying that that's not true. The ghost could be right and Hamlet could also go crazy. Just some stuff to think about. But we'll pick up here next week when I go through the rest of Act 4 and Act 5. I hope you all are practicing social distancing and doing the responsible thing. I know it stinks, but, you know, think about your grandparents. Think about my grandparents. I'm thinking about yours. Think about my 4-week-old. There's lots of people out here who don't have a choice. And we may be, like, strong. Our immunities may be strong, but, like, some people aren't as lucky, okay? So thank you for doing the right thing and staying home and listening to my long speeches. I miss being in class with y'all, and I'm sorry the semester has to end this way, but we're going to get through it. And maybe there'll be a little bit of learning, too. Hey, this is the nursery. Welcome. Okay, have a great day, y'all, and I'll see you next week.